Hello and welcome to this Q&A with the Fertility Alliance. Today we're very lucky to be joined by Robin Hadley, who's an associate lecturer at Manchester Met University and who has done a lot of work around male childlessness. So welcome, Robin. It's lovely to have you with us. You're probably best known for your research about men being broody, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit about that.
Thanks for inviting me on. It's a joy to be here and an honour. Uh, my research into men being broody came through my training as a counsellor and taking the masters in that, and because counselling had to be something you experienced. And I was really broody in my 30s, so I looked at that. I guess one of the underlying questions around that was I the only one who felt so terribly broody, like an ache, and a cloud around me? I sort of remember. So doing my MA in my mid 40s, I looked at that and found interviewed 10 men and found that no, I wasn't the only one. But there's no sort of social narrative for men to occupy. I mean, there's lots of different narratives for women to occupy. Some are great, some are not so great, and quite a few are in the middle. But nothing around men and the desire for fatherhood and what that means. There's sort of a couple of factors there that are myths, that men are fully fertile from puberty until death, and that men aren't bothered. I think as a species, since we're dominating the planet quite a lot, if half of the species wasn't bothered, we wouldn't be where we are now, in lots of ways. And then after my MA, I did a self-funded MSc looking at the levels of broodiness, because the assumption is that women are broody and men aren't bothered. And I couldn't find anywhere where that was seemed to be tested out, and yet it was generally accepted. It was in academic papers and the general media. Um, and so I did my little MSc study and did an item on an online questionnaire on yearning and broke it down into what I thought were the elements of yearning. And also I did a little test data gathering thing and sort of pulled it together for that. And I found the men were more depressed and more isolated than mothers, fathers, and women, childless women or non-parent women. And of all the items, the childless men match the childless women and the mothers, and these are sort of emotional items, much more than they did the fathers. So that could well be that when you become a father, things change for you emotionally. Um, and I thought that was sort of fascinating that the tracking, the emotional tracking was very, very similar. Jealousy, anger, isolation, depression, joy, those sort of things. And I, that idea of broodiness and the need to procreate, to become a dad, it just fascinates me why there isn't so much around that, around men. Um, and I think, it is a big driver that not having a narrative to be able to say, I'm like this is it, compared to the amount of narratives around motherhood and non-motherhood for women. Either you're a father or you're not, and that's it, it seems.
Did the findings surprise you that there were so many other men feeling exactly the same way as you did?
It did actually, to a degree, but also a sense of relief that I wasn't the only one. And this is what, when people ask me, what would you say to a man who's going through infertility treatment and is feeling down and or is very quiet around it, tell him he's not the only one, because we don't know. Because there's no social narratives out there. So you're not the only one. There's more childless men than childless women. There's quite a few demographic studies pointing at, and that's another surprising thing. There's been more childless men than childless women because the association with childlessness is so strong around. women and how that's reinforced in different cultures uh, and in society in general.
And how much was your desire to do this research driven by your personal experience?
I think quite a lot. Once I found out I wasn't the only one, but also there was nothing really around men's actual experience. So there were sort of stats around it, but not the personal, not the stories, not the life histories around it. And that sort of piqued my interest that, you know, why isn't that? You know, it's half the population and yet no narrative. But also in talking to the men, I thought, somebody needs to say something. And since I've got this information and I'm interested, and I think possibly because of my age, because I was late 40s, early 50s then, that I can stick my head up above the parapet and say, this is what it's like. Whereas if I was in my mid 30s, or when I was in my mid 30s, although I felt that, there's no way I'd express it. There's no way I'd say to some, I don't know, colleague or friend even, I'm feeling really, really broody. I'm really desperate to be a dad. Um, Maybe a partner if it was a really well established relationship. Um, yeah, I'd do it then. And I think that would reflect on what a lot of men do. Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, in another book previous to that, she wrote, women are scared of being murdered, and men are scared of being humiliated. And I think that's so accurate about men fearing being humiliated. And that's put in us from a very early age, 'cause we're born, and as babies, we must generally have the same emotional capacity. So, what changes that women, and we're talking broad brushstrokes here, can express themselves, feel it's safe to do that, and maybe even you have to express yourself even when you don't want to. So, I think for men, it's the opposite, and when that is put in, and I think it's really interesting if you look on Facebook or that sort of social media, at what age a baby or a toddler is called my little man, my little soldier, because that's the start of it. That's the adultification, if that's a word, of a, a little baby. And that's going to be in all sorts of ways around that infant. And for women and for girls, my little princess would be the one rather than my little woman. Or my little soldier in that sort of term, or my little footballer. So yeah, sorry, I think I've drifted off from your question
No,
there.
you haven't at all. It's very interesting. But I wanted to ask you, do you think that things have changed a bit now? Do you think that it is perhaps a bit more acceptable, maybe since your research, for men to say, actually, I do feel broody?
I It's getting there, I think. I think one of the good things about social media is that you can get stories out. I think also when it comes to the press, there's a generation of journalists coming through that are broody, that haven't reproduced. So that's the story. And there is a change, I think, in media from big stuff to get in the personal stories are more and more appropriate and used. So I think there's more out there, but on social media, it's always a bit, mm, you know, how many trolls do you attract from saying that of people who want to, men are men, women are women, what you're worried about, have my kids would be one. Uh, to which the reply is, well, if you've seen Back to the Future, and when the photograph starts to dissolve, it starts with the family members disappearing. So if I took your kids, do you know the bridges, social bridges that are going to be burnt there? And also the thing for men would be, oh, well, you can have a great time. You can play in a field and all that. And there's a sort of specific age when that's appropriate, really. Wherever you are in the world, sometimes it's really defined, other times it's not. But some of them or quite a lot of the men I spoke to said, I don't want to be an old father when I should be a grandfather, let's say 60, something like that. I want to be doing things with my children, playing football, going for the first uh, drink, taking them to university or college or stuff like that. And I don't want to be an old father. So, yeah, but yeah, I think things are changing. There's more narratives out there. I guess part of that was there may be too many narratives out there. But yes, it is all down to me. Absolutely, my research knocked the ball out of the park, and the world has changed. I'm
What
being
changes,
ironic. Sorry.
what changes would you still like to see? I mean, what do you think could change that would actually really make a difference for men?
I think education of young men and narratives out there. I mean, I think men's health is being picked up much more now. Men's mental health, um, and certainly if you uh, are we sort of judging society by our virility? Not only our biological virility, but our social and economic virility. And if we are, maybe we can put out there there's different forms of virility.
I wanted to ask you what your advice would be or your suggestions would be to someone who's feeling like you were feeling when you started your research, maybe feeling lonely, feeling a bit isolated. What would you say to them?
I'd say go and talk to a counsellor or find an outlet. You need to get that stuff that's down here out there. And maybe I certainly one of the things guys have said, one of the key phrases is something's missing. And it is a key phrase because there's something missing out there, the social narrative, but there's something missing in here. And the other thing that's missing is the conduit between the two. And so finding that conduit to safely release what's happening underneath and inside is really beneficial. Uh, Getting a narrative that you can occupy. So you could look at my life and say, well, he was broody, so I'm a bit like him. But what I would expect men to say is, yeah, that's you, but I'm like this. And it's finding that I'm like this that's important because it may be the first time you've recognized yourself. This is what I'm like.
Were there things that really helped you at that time?
At that time, no, there wasn't any much that helped me in my mid 30s when I was feeling really, really broody. I think at late 30s, I met my wife, and I think getting into a relationship helped me, and it helped in that balance of a not being alone quite directly, but also having somebody to talk to and somebody who I could express that to. And we did have a conversation around my broodiness and what I could do about it, which included whether I should try and find somebody somebody else. And my balancing was actually, there's a fantastic woman. I'm batting out my league, still am. Um, Luckily, I managed to confuse her by dodging, moving quickly, so she hasn't realised, or if she has, she's accepted it. That I'm not that, but I can be this, and this is good enough for me. This supplies enough for me. And there's a sadness around not being a dad and not having those things associated with being a dad. Um, but I still have a life. I've still done stuff. I still have a virility.
If you could do research into anything else around men and childlessness, what areas do you think are still unexplored?
I still think there's lots on men's thoughts and feelings around fatherhood and reproducing. I think there's an awful lot that can go on there. I'd love to do more on that. If we could get the funding to do it and relate that to health and social. aspects, the psychosocial, would be, I think, really useful. Um, well, not only to me personally, but to society. But I find it really interesting. People's stories and people's lives are so interesting, and I think for men, I think men are fascinating. I really do, and I think it's fascinating because they have sort of a limited social script to occupy, and they battle so hard against this ideal masculinity, our ideals, ways of being, to try and survive and fulfill it. And I think I'm sure women would argue the same thing, that maybe that's the thing. We're all trying to do something that's very, really, really hard to do. And actually, we've got to negotiate our own ways. So, yeah, anything to do with men.
Thank you so much. That was really, really brilliant and really interesting. And it was really lovely to have a conversation with you today. So thank you for speaking to us at the Fertility Alliance.
Thank you.